I have heard this from both Christians and skeptics, so my title unfairly leans towards Christians. But being a Christian myself, I feel I should handle my own side first before the opposition. So are we wrong for judging other people? Should the right hand not know what the left has done? If you enjoy content like this, where I publicly test claims made about Christianity, drop a like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Welcome to Veritas. There are a surprising amount of verses that tell us not to judge. The first place we're going to is Matthew 7 verse 1, which states, "Judge not that ye be not judged." This is also paired with Luke 6 verse 37, which says, "Judge not, and ye shall not be judged. Condemn not, and ye shall not be condemned. Forgive, and ye shall be forgiven." These verses usually get used when people are called out for their behavior. However, using just those verses alone wouldn't be enough, and they know it. So they usually use other verses to support their theory. They usually point to John 8 and the adulterous woman, where Jesus says, "He that is without sin among you, let him cast a stone." Though they also add in Romans 3 verse 23, which states, "For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God," which would seem clear. We are all sinners, and so we aren't allowed to judge, because none of us are without sin. I mean, that doctrine does sound strong and seems to be very biblically based, though it does seem that there is a problem with context. Before we do anything, let's go back to Matthew and Luke, then read what the text in context says. So if we go to Matthew 7 now, from verse 1 to 5, Jesus says, "Judge not that ye be not judged. For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. And with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again. And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Or how wilt thou say to thy brother, Let me pull out the mote out of thine eye, and, behold, a beam is in thine own eye? Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to cast out the mote out of thy brother's eye." Before we say anything, let's go to Luke 6. It's a bit of a read, sorry. This time verses 37 to 42, which states, "Judge not, and ye shall not be judged. Condemn not, and ye shall not be condemned. Forgive, and ye shall be forgiven. Give, and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, and shaken together, and running over, shall men give into your bosom. For with the same measure that ye mete withal, it shall be measured to you again." And he spake a parable unto them. "Can the blind lead the blind? Shall they not both fall into the ditch? The disciple is not above his master, but every one that is perfect shall be as his master. And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but perceivest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Either how canst thou say to thy brother, Brother, let me pull out the mote that is in thine eye, when thou beholdest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Thou hypocrite, cast out first the beam out of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to pull out the mote that is in thy brother's eye." So in context, these verses are actually saying something completely different. Yes, we are told in these two verses not to judge. However, it's not the judgment itself that is wrong. It is how you judge, who you judge, and finally, what you judge. Yes, we have all sinned and need mercy from God. Therefore, we are to forgive one another if we expect to be forgiven. The nuance here is, however, that if someone continues in sin, they aren't forgiven by God. We can see this in Romans 6 verses 1 to 2, which says, "What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin, that grace may abound? God forbid. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? So, to then use scripture as a defense to keep doing what you are doing is not just unbiblical, it borders on blasphemy. Most people also don't make the distinction between judgments, as there exists more than one type. We often confuse what judgment means in the first place. Judgment either means condemnation or it means restoration. It depends on the context. For example, those long passages in Matthew and Luke are very context specific. In those instances, Jesus was talking about fellow believers, which would today be called the church, the saved. So I don't mean Christianity as a broad and general category. I specifically mean within the church. We have every right to criticize an LGBTQ affirming church, for example, as they are now outside the confines of the church. We can even see that Jesus making distinctions in judgments. Firstly, Jesus outlines an entire process of judgment for the church in another long passage, so bear with me, Matthew 18 verses 15 to 17, which states, "Moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. If he shall hear thee, thou hast gained thy brother. But if he will not hear thee, then take with thee 1 or 2 more, that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if he shall neglect to hear them, tell it unto the church. But if he neglect to hear the church, let him be unto thee as a heathen man and a publican." This is not the only verse we can look at. There is also 1 Corinthians 5 verses 12 to 13, which says, "For what have I to do to judge them also that are without? Do not ye judge them that are within? But them that are without God judgeth. Therefore put away from among yourselves that wicked person." Paul is clearly saying that we need to judge those around us, though we need to be careful what we mean by judge. Judgment means coming to a moral or spiritual conclusion based on someone's actions. Judgment does not mean that I will try and punish you for what you did. Instead, after I have made my judgment, I am commanded to do something else. If we take a look at 2 Timothy 4 verse 2, it states, "Preach the word, be instant in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and doctrine." If I have judged you with righteous judgment, as John 7 verse 24 says, and I have found you unbiblical, it is then my duty to reprove, rebuke, and exhort you with long suffering and doctrine. So yes, biblically it would seem very necessary to judge believers according to the word, but judging another of a sin that we are guilty of is also wrong, as Jesus points out in the passages of Matthew and Luke we looked at. However, here we are specifically commanded to judge and correct those in the church. But what about those outside the church? Well, there are so many verses I can choose from, so drawing from a metaphorical hat, we'll look at 1 Corinthians 5 verses 9 to 10, which says, "I wrote unto you in an epistle not to company with fornicators, yet not altogether with the fornicators of this world, or with the covetous, or extortioners, or with idolaters, for then must ye needs go out of the world." Paul accuses people in the world, outside the church, of various sins and calls them fornicators, idolaters, etc. Yet to be able to label those people as such, Paul first had to make a moral and spiritual judgment on their actions. Therefore, we are allowed to judge those outside the church as well. However, the way you approach them is different to how you'd approach a fellow Christian. The way you correct a non-Christian is by following the steps of salvation and guiding him or her on that path. You can check out my video on salvation. I'll have the link in the description below and a pop-up card above. There are a bunch more verses we could have looked at, but we covered some rather extended pieces of scripture and I don't want the video to drag on for too long on one point. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you stayed to the end, I hope I could show that we are allowed to judge both Christians and non-Christians, but that we also have a duty to correct them and bring them back to Christ. I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did, drop a like. If you want to see more content like this, subscribe and hit the bell to be notified when I release the next video. Drop a comment below and let me hear your thoughts on judging others. As always, don't forget Acts 17:11. I am Brandon, this was Veritas, and have a blessed rest of the day.